Hello, hi, hey yo, sup all you dudes and dudettes, my name is Ginator84, and having covered my favourite games, I thought it was time to do my favourite movies. I've always enjoyed watching films, but it wasn't until 2017 when I started going through a collection of Best Picture nominees with my dad, where it became as much of an obsession for me as gaming, and it has become the art form I most want to contribute to, having done my no-budget feature documentary and written a few screenplays I'd love to see made one day. So condensing this list was insanely tough, especially as there's a lot I've never discussed on my channel before, so I'll be doing this in two parts. Today is all about the more significant and impactful titles to me. The ones that left the biggest impression, I got the most obsessed with, and generally seem to summate why I love particular genres, eras, and styles of film, once again presented in the order I first experienced them. Here we go! Most people probably don't include shorts among their favourite movies, but I have to give a mention to the original Wallace and Gromit trilogy and especially The Wrong Trousers. I enjoyed the later ones too, but they lack the low-key charm which made the first three so special and distinctly British. The characters' attitudes remain understated even when visiting the moon on a homemade rocket or getting caught up in a Hitchcockian thriller. And The Wrong Trousers makes the segue from enjoyably mundane to beautifully constructed suspense and intrigue the most seamlessly, on top of featuring an iconic villain and a brilliantly creative, funny, and exciting set piece at the end. It's one of my favourite things in general, and a grand day out and a close shave are also such delights to return to time and time again. On to our first feature, and isn't nostalgia a wonderful thing? There's plenty of things I realise aren't that great now, I'll continue to get lots of enjoyment out of because of the good times and memories associated with them. That's not to say there aren't any movies from my youth which hold up to scrutiny, and the one I might actually appreciate more now is Hoodwinked. Which says a lot, because when I was younger, I went through a phase where I was so obsessed with it, I watched it every evening for at least an entire week. While I can understand being turned off by the not great animation, although compared to something like Food Fight, it really isn't that bad. And besides,
you can't judge a book by its cover.
With that in mind, the voice acting and especially the writing here are absolutely top notch. The crime mystery spin on the Red Riding Hood story is a blast. The subversions of these characters, it was funny to realize on my most recent viewing how much the wolf is just animated Fletch, give the proceedings such a unique tone and humor that continues to crack me up.
We don't arrest people for being creepy.
Yeah, Bruce, know that guy we got in the tank?
The creepy one?
Yeah, better let him go.
Most of all, I love watching the different perspectives unfold and how they connect and contrast with one another. When Red recounts meeting the wolf, the lighting is ominous, but when the wolf recounts it, it's shown as a normal conversation. And Red's story leaves out her beating up the wolf to make herself look more innocent. It's incredibly clever stuff. In all honesty, this might be one of my favourite screenplays. And while learning about the production of this movie and how low budget it was has given me a greater appreciation for it, Hoodwinked has entertained me for years without that knowledge, and I have no doubt it will continue to without fail for many more. I've talked about Indiana Jones several times on my channel without properly addressing the three films that make it one of my favourite series, so I'm eager to finally do so here. On Christmas Day last year, me and my family caught a bit of Raiders of the Lost Ark on TV while we waited for the Gavin and Stacey finale to start. And honestly, if not for Gavin and Stacy, it really felt like we would have just sat and watched the whole thing, ad breaks and all. I find the atmosphere and tone of these movies so immediately enrapturing. The visceral feel to the locations and action, Harrison Ford's magnetic performance, all the little moments that inject each scene with so much personality, plus the romanticism, sense of mystery, and sweeping grandeur elevated through the roof by John Williams' incredible music. They're as much comfort viewing as they are filmmaking masterworks. I go back and forth between Raiders and Last Crusade being my favourite. The former has easily the best villain, love interest, and many of the most iconic images, both for their content and how ingenious the framing can be. The latter has Sean Connery.
Junior?
His performance is absolute perfection, and the chemistry between him and Harrison as father and son is pure movie magic. Seeing this with a packed, enthusiastic audience at the Prince Charles Cinema is one of the best times I've ever had at the movies. I don't quite rate Temple of Doom as highly as the other two, but not by much, because I love how audacious a sequel it is, barely repeating Raiders and going all in on its sinister tone and crazier suspension of disbelief necessitating set pieces, and how it braces the audience for all that with an unexpected musical number telling us that in this movie, anything goes. And the final third has got to be one of the greatest thrill rides in cinema. It is absolutely relentless, edge of your seat excitement. Indiana Jones is the first of a few entries which I've always really enjoyed but gained a newfound love for in recent years. As a 2000s kid, it's hard to imagine this series was ever new for a time. It's so iconic and fully formed right from that first match fade from the Paramount Mountain, it almost feels as if these movies always had to be a part of film history. And speaking of franchises I've covered on my channel before, when I discussed the Professor Layton series in my favourite games video, there were two big aspects of it I elected not to talk about: its music and the movie. The Eternal Diva is always going to be the definitive game-to-film adaptation in my eyes. It features the whimsy, intrigue, and artistry I love from the games, whilst telling a faster-paced story which wouldn't work with the games' style and mechanics, thus offering a unique experience to the series. As for the music, the Layton soundtracks are some of the most elegant and soul-stirring I've ever heard, so centering much of the film's story on song and score emphasizes how glorious these orchestrations are. And in general, this movie has been a wonderful way to return to this world whilst waiting for enough time to forget the puzzle solutions to get the most out of replaying the games. But even when the source material is fresh in my mind, I still get swept up by all the thrills and emotion of this game for eternal life. As a fan, I can't help but love every minute of it. And hey, with the franchise making a comeback, maybe we'll finally get that second movie. Continuing with the anime train of thought, I'm a big fan of Studio Ghibli. The sights and sounds they've conjured up are some of the most beautiful and immersive I've ever seen in an animated film, which makes Spirited Away, my favourite of theirs, one of the most beautiful and immersive animated films I've ever seen. The imagination of its world is surreal, spellbinding, and absolutely overwhelming, with an unexplained mysteriousness to the atmosphere, the environments, and Joe Hisashi's incredible music evoke that's indescribably captivating. And while a lot of Ghibli protagonists appearing very blasé to the stranger elements can be part of the charm, having Chihiro be so distraught by it all early on makes it very easy to empathize with her and adds so much emotional heft to the proceedings. That moment after the first night where she bursts into tears is genuinely gut-wrenching. Her growth into a resilient, independent figure in this scary, dreamlike place, by the time it reaches its end, I feel like I've spent a lifetime on that journey in the best way. It is a hypnotic experience. I'm not including Christmas movies here because they're connected to a very specific time of year, plus I've already discussed my favorite holiday specials in another video. I bring it up now because I've spoken a couple of times about how much I love Will Ferrell's performance in Elf, which he followed up not even a year later with my other favourite of his, Anchorman. When I first saw it at 11 years old, it felt like the funniest thing I'd ever seen. And at the start of this year, I rewatched it with my parents on a trip away, where it had been long enough since my last viewing that it tickled my funny bone as if it was my first time again. So much so, it earned its spot on this first list as the comedy that shaped much of my sense of humour. It's ultra silly in everything it does, from its hyperactive set pieces all the way down to just the character names, and there's a very nice mix between big, loud, and deadpan line deliveries from a pitch-perfect cast.
Oh yeah, I ate a big red candle.
The sequel is okay, it has its moments, but it's way too long and the pacing feels so slow and awkward compared to how the original zips along with great energy. It's made this probably one of my most watched movies, and I imagine it'll continue to leave me giggling away at all the classic moments it packs in from Ron Burgundy and company.
You stay classy, planet Earth.
I've always had a soft spot for this movie. The Telltale game of all things got me a lot more hooked on it initially, and I have fun memories going to the Immersive Experience event and watching the whole trilogy with my sister on October 21st, 2015. But one evening early in 2020, I fancied a rewatch as it had been a few years, and that was when it truly became a favourite of mine. It's the magic of the movies at its finest. The script is so perfectly constructed, I'm almost envious of how well the setups are set up and paid off, yet the actors make this efficiently written story seem as if it's unfolding on the fly, completely organically. The characters are so well drawn, the scope of this small-scale adventure in this quaint American town seem absolutely epic in the context of their lives. A chase around the town square feels as dangerous as the biggest action set piece, and a single punch carries momentous weight. Much of this film is pure fun, but there's also so many sequences that give me proper goosebumps, even when I was just scrolling through the footage for this video. And the clock tower finale. I know how it plays out, I know Marty and Doc succeed, and yet it leaves me on the edge of my seat, breathless with excitement every time without fail. I find the 80s were the peak of very simple and incredibly sturdy storytelling in film, where the only goal was to entertain the viewer, yet the execution would lift these experiences to such a high level, the analytical cinephile brain would be just as satisfied as the heart and soul. That's the buzz I get from watching the Indiana Jones trilogy, as well as Back to the Future. There are multiple Batman movies I'd happily discuss here, but I'll save the others for next time and focus for now on my absolute favourite, which has always been and always will be Mask of the Phantasm. I was hooked on the animated series when I first watched this. The already excellent voice work, storytelling, and striking animation from the show gets dialed up a notch whilst raising the stakes and darkness. I do sometimes forget just how intense that felt the first time. It also contains incredibly well thought out and exciting set pieces, whilst getting to the heart of the tragedy at the core of the character better than any of the live action films to date. The way the flashbacks challenge Bruce with the allure of a normal, peaceful life, only for the corruption in Gotham to unknowingly deny him that, and being the catalyst for his turn into the Dark Knight. There's so many moments here which pierce through the brooding badassery of Batman so powerfully. And having his lost love return completely consumed by vengeance bolsters the tragedy so well. Is the final moment of Batman continuing his crusade actually a triumphant one? It's hard to say, but ultimately, it's all he's got. I have watched this God knows how many times, including twice in cinemas, which was an absolute dream both times. The visual construction and Shirley Walker's incredible booming score leap off the big screen, yet it continues to give me goosebumps and sweep me up without fail, and that it accomplishes what it does in a lean 70 minutes continues to leave me in awe. This is right up there for me as one of my absolute all-time favorites. Something I don't think I've ever mentioned on my channel before is that I was homeschooled for the later part of my education. Something I did during that time as part of English literature was go through the Harry Potter series, watching each film after finishing its respective book. Although I'd dabbled in it before then and was aware of a couple big spoilers, fully immersing myself into this world over a few months was an absolutely wonderful experience. I don't love all the movies, and there are some very significant omissions from the books later on, but every entry has its merits, and the overall achievement of this decade-long franchise, its cast coming of age amid a gradually darkening tone and multiple directors whilst remaining generally consistent in quality, is well worth applauding. The first three are my favourites. Chris Columbus's two especially are like a trip into the mind's eye when reading the books. So many of the locations, moments, and especially the characters are precisely how I imagined them. While the child actors and CGI aren't the best in Philosopher's Stone, it's made up for with serious heart, an amazing third act, and a lot of poignant, quieter moments not present in the book which add a lot of atmosphere. Chamber of Secrets features the same sense of magic and danger on top of better effects and acting from the young cast, which allows for more dynamic and striking visuals, combined with much of the setup having been covered in its predecessor, and I think I prefer this to Philosophers, although I do flip-flop between the two. As for the fan favourite entry, I remember being caught off guard by the drastic change in style the first time I watched it, but I've come to really appreciate the greater cinematic flair Alfonso Cuarón brought to the series. And what seems like the Shrieking Shack confrontation may lack in density, the energy of the performances and pacing still evokes the page-turning quality of those chapters from the book. Plus, the Time Turner sequence is easily one of the best stretches of the entire franchise. The rest range from solid to pretty darn great, but the adventurous tone found in the first three makes them the most special and oddly cozy entries for me. Now, how about another iconic John Williams score? I was pretty late to the Star Wars party, getting into it a couple months before Force Awakens came out, so I don't have the nostalgia most have for the franchise, but I still found myself enchanted by this incredibly exciting universe. And while the quality varies from entry to entry, the imagination of the world building is always compelling. The brief glances of different species and offhanded remarks about all manner of events and things makes it all feel so vast and lived in. I get why Empire Strikes Back is typically considered the best one, but the one I gravitate most towards when I'm itching to return to a galaxy far, far away is the original. I've gotten used to not calling it A New Hope. Obviously, it being the most standalone entry helps, but the rest of the series splits the characters up into different plot threads and storylines, which works very well, don't get me wrong, but I love having this varied cast of characters together experiencing their own versions of the same adventure. You've got the wide-eyed Luke longing for something greater and being thrust into it, C-3PO and R2-D2 as the incredibly likable, funny, and knowledgeable guides into this universe, Obi-Wan seeing to Leia's call whilst serving as Luke's mentor, Leia introducing us to the resilient nature of the rebellion, and for Han and Chewie, it's a simple job turned into a spectacular mess.
Had a slight weapons malfunction. But everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?
The dynamics between everyone is so entertaining, especially during the Death Star sequence, and I also love how breathless the pace is, propelling along with barely a moment to reflect on what came before. I mean, there's been influential films before and after Star Wars, but few have continued to endure, inspire, and provide such a rollicking experience like this one. Alright, now we arrive at the watershed moment, when film became as important to me as video games, and the filmmaking seed was planted. Not that I knew that right away, because the first time I saw La La Land, it weren't quite what I expected it to be, so I found it a bit underwhelming until the ending. I'll never forget walking out of that screening, still sort of disappointed, but taken enough with how it wrapped up to know my thoughts were going to evolve from there. And sure enough, I couldn't stop thinking about it nor stop listening to the soundtrack. It became the first film I ever saw twice in cinemas, and without the preconception of the kind of musical I expected it to be, I loved it. And with each additional viewing, it feels more and more like the ultimate summation of why I love movies. The opening freeway number sets the scene magnificently. After a spectacular long take of this ensemble of ambitious dreamers that continues to leave me breathless, they get back into their cars, the title comes up, and they go back to honking their horns, annoyed at the traffic once again. The joyful delirium of romanticizing dreams before it crashes right back down to the harsh reality, a microcosm of the entire film. And still in the opening shot, the camera meets Mia and Sebastian on the same literal and metaphorical road as the other dancers and becomes eager to follow their story. So the flickering lights off in the distance of those beautiful cityscapes entertain the possibility of other like-minded tales unfolding as this one does. I adore the dreamy atmosphere. The song and dance sequences arrive more naturally than in many other musicals, and the lack of polish in Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone's singing and dancing adds to the feeling these characters need to express themselves in grand bursts of impulse, not because there hasn't been a number in a while. It's more vulnerable and authentic. But the absolute best thing Damien Chazelle does with the genre here is turn a trend from the 50s, which often felt like an unnecessarily long show-off, into a beautifully bittersweet symphony which wraps up the movie with a glorious bow. The ending was the thing that got me to consider this film initially, and now it's my favorite finale to any film. It's the power of cinema on full display. On its own, a wonderful scene, but it only works because every moment of chemistry, drama, romance, cynicism, and contrast has been building towards this moment the entire time, and you feel it. And honestly, I could happily go on. But we've got a lot more amazing titles to talk about, most of which I appreciate on a deeper level because this one opened my eyes to what the art form was capable of. Suffice to say, La La Land captures the feelings of chasing a high whilst giving it to the viewer better than any other film I've seen, and it is my favorite. Well, if it isn't the subject of my most popular video to date. This is another trilogy I've gained a much greater love for in recent years, specifically after seeing it in cinemas and being blown away by how colossal the scale of it all was. And with the gravitas Peter Jackson gives to Tolkien's world and mythos, these films are properly immersive experiences I love to lose myself in. Fellowship of the Ring does such a fantastic job introducing us to and gradually expanding our view of Middle-earth, so the rise in stakes and visual splendor properly hits whilst never losing sight of the characters on this vast canvas. It's the only entry where I love the theatrical and extended versions equally. Two Towers isn't quite as much of a favourite as the other two. I simply don't find it quite as investing, although I have come to appreciate its place in the trilogy a lot more. It's got some of the best scenery panning shots and music cues of the series, and the entire Helm's Deep battle is amazing. The first moment on the big screen where the immense scope took my breath away. And it serves its purpose, putting the pieces in place that make the culmination one of the most emotive films I've ever seen. Return of the King is my favourite. The opening scene with Smeagol creates a lingering unease for Frodo's fate, and the weight of everything else these characters have gone through is so well established. The struggle between two is just as momentous an event as those massive, awe-inspiring battles. And then there's the lighting of the beacon scene, where the audience gets to fully absorb the sheer majesty of this world and adventure. I think it's my favourite scene of the whole trilogy, but there's so many to choose from, especially here, because even and especially in its most intimate moments, this film is gargantuan in its power. The first time I watched 2001 was one of the most amazing movie viewing experiences I've ever had. It was my first Stanley Kubrick film, and being aware of his perfectionism made every moment feel so meticulous and alluring. In particular, the scenes capturing the beauty and desolation of space travel with the still astonishing visual effects and wonderful classical music left me absolutely entranced. The rare moments the camera goes handheld or the cuts come quick and sharp really hit hard, and watching late at night, those flashes of Dave during the Stargate sequence genuinely terrified me, honestly more so than Kubrick's actual horror film. Now I'll admit, compared to the other films here, this hasn't quite sustained repeat viewings, but as my introduction to more art house cinema, I cannot deny how blown away I was that first time, and the sensory experience remains captivating. This has got to be one of the most life-affirming movies I've ever seen. The characters and performances are brilliant, set up perfectly in the early scenes so you understand and are endeared to all of these very contrasting personalities before they undergo this internal and external journey. And when that journey is funny, it's absolutely hilarious, and when it's sad, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And the culmination of it all, with them finally arriving at the beauty pageant only to rebel against it once they realize how truly messed up it is, it's one of the funniest and most joyous dance scenes and finales. I love how Richard's philosophy of the divide between winners and losers is shattered here, because we recognize the Hoovers as the biggest winners by seeming like the biggest losers to everyone around them. It leaves me with such a glorious feeling every time I watch it, the kind where I feel excited to live again. It's a wonderful move here, showcase of how powerful indie cinema can be, although it does make for one strange Breaking Bad prequel. Something I didn't mention when I spoke about what a knockout finale La La Land has is how impressive it was that Damien Chazelle delivered it hot off the heels of Whiplash's knockout finale. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's a sense of impending war to Whiplash before we even see the opening shot. It perfectly sets up how this mentor-student relationship crackles with the intensity of a proper thriller, and so that simple first push in on Andrew drumming already has a creeping dread to it. The psychological battle between nurturing talent or letting the obsession consume you, and the way it's presented here, is utterly compelling. I'm in love with the frenetic energy Chazelle brings to many of his films. This is a small-scale indie movie that feels big, and no matter how many times I've seen it, the tension in certain sequences remains absolutely immense. J.K. Simmons is also amazing here, as he is in most things, monstrous yet surprisingly funny and still very human, almost convincing the viewer of the reasoning for his methodology in the bar scene. And just like La La Land, it moves towards its grand finale in such a way it feels like everything beforehand has merely been the setup for it. And those last 10 minutes are absolutely electrifying, saying so much without needing to say a thing. Andrew seemingly gets his victorious Charlie Parker moment, yet winds up letting Fletcher seize back control. The cut to Andrew's dad watching him absolutely demolish the drum set gives me chills every time. We're watching this guy essentially sell his soul to the devil for the chance to live on through dinner table conversations lamenting one of the greats. It's not a happy ending at all, but the rest of the film does such a fantastic job putting us in these characters' headspace, the sense of triumph is very much palpable. Good job. Man, where do I start with Fargo? Every element is so perfectly realized, from the atmosphere that's both cold and desolate, yet cozy and inviting, to how every character, right down to the smallest of supporting roles, feel lived in and vivid. The back and forths with that wonderful dialect as a result are some of the most entertaining scenes I've seen in any film, with some of the most entertaining performances I've seen in any film. Jerry Lundegaard may not be a good person. He concocts this harebrained scheme that's doomed before it's even set into motion.
Shep said you'd be here at 7:30. What gives, man?
Shep said 8:30.
Yet his resilience and determination, despite being so clueless and in over his head, in combination with what William H. Macy gives to him, is oddly pitiful. There's a great quote in the making of featurette where he describes there being a gentle touch for this vicious story, which I think really encapsulates the tone of the whole thing. There's a through line with all the criminals, who we see most of the time simply struggling to get through an otherwise ordinary day. And then there's Marge. At the heart of this complicated situation unfolding in this chilly landscape is a woman leading a simple, humble life who boasts the warmest personality, always level-headed despite the darkness of this enthralling disaster she unravels and condemns. Without her presence, it'd still be a great movie, but a little too ugly and unpleasant to continually return to. With her presence, this is one of my most watched and top unconventional comfort films. I love literally everything about it. I do sometimes wonder if I exaggerate my love for Smokey and the Bandit. Then Burt Reynolds smiles to the camera and it feels like I'm watching the best film ever made. The charisma and sense of fun bursting off this thing is infectious, and the vibe of it I think served as the precursor to my love of shows like The A-Team and Magnum P.I. The craft feels quick and dirty in the most charming way, the personalities are vibrant with great dynamics between them, and the set pieces leave me giddy with excitement. And amid all the crazy stunts, this movie also does a great job of capturing the feel of taking a long car ride, especially in the conversations. I love the dialogue here, it's full of zest, yet a lot of it is mundane enough not to fully remember, so these scenes continually wind up offering the same entertainment value as the first viewing. There's a lot of variety in both the banter and events and situations as the caper evolves that keeps things consistently fresh and engaging, and although most may think of Darth Vader as the great movie villain introduced in 1977, he pales in comparison to the greatness of Sheriff Buford T. Justice.
You some bitch!
The main trio are extremely likable, but Jackie Gleason steals the whole movie, no doubt. To think he apparently improvised most of his dialogue is insane. He is consistently deranged and hilarious all the way through.
The fact that you are a sheriff is not germane to the situation.
The goddamn Germans got nothing to do with it!
Now, I'm not sure if I'd fully embrace this as much if I was seeing it for the first time nowadays, having become somewhat jaded with my film viewing. So I'm incredibly glad I initially watched it when I did, as it became such a joy for me to revisit on repeat. And you know who else loved this movie? Alfred Hitchcock, which gives me a very nice segue into the next section. A lot of his best often represents the cream of the crop of older cinema, none more so for me than Rear Window. When done well, a largely single-setting film can be incredibly gripping, and a big reason why this is my favorite example of that is the story doesn't actually take place in one location or room, it's the perspective it's told in. I love all the little stories Jeffries spies on in the different apartments, often reflecting doubts and insecurities of his in his relationship with Lisa, whilst being very enjoyable or even very moving vignettes. Within Jeffrey's apartment are some great characters. Jimmy Stewart is one of my favourite actors from that era, and he's as great as always, and seeing Lisa and Stella become increasingly invested in the situation is both incredibly fun, but also taps into people's morbid obsession with true crime in a way that feels even more relevant today.
You and me with long faces plunged into despair because we find out a man didn't kill his wife. We're two of the most frightening ghouls I've ever known.
And because of how the story is framed within this confine, when they start actively intervening in the situation, few other films are able to make the viewer feel so helpless and on edge. Us as viewers are always on the outside looking in, and this movie actively utilizes that fact to heighten the suspense in the final stretch, and man, it is brilliantly tense. This is the oldest film on either list, and I think the old school charm adds so much to the thrill of it, I can't imagine it being as great if done in a more modern style. I hadn't revisited this for a very long time before making this video, and I'm kicking myself for not having done so sooner. I forgot just how fantastic it really is. I've loved a lot of Disney and Pixar films throughout my life, a few I'll be talking about in the next video, but Coco stands out as a particularly special one for how it combines the classic Disney story formula with Pixar's rich emotional heft and the incredibly imaginative, clever, and touching world it creates out of a fascinating culture. The Land of the Dead, perhaps ironically, bursts with life and activity. The biggest plus of CG animation over the hand-drawn style is how dense with detail the frame can be, which heightens the immersion tenfold and makes the most beautiful images overwhelming to take in. This was the second film I saw twice in cinemas, the third we'll be talking about very soon, because I was so drawn to what a visual feast it was, along with its themes of family, passion, and the power of art that, on that second viewing, reduced me to tears by the end. I love how, as a Disney-adjacent product, it properly explores the medium of music and makes the musical sequences an organic and integral part of the experience. That first scene of Miguel playing the guitar where he gets completely lost in it is so powerful, and instantly connects you to his motivations. What's so extraordinary about Pixar's best is how they can have lots of really fun, wondrous antics, yet the emotions explored at the heart of these stories brings it all right down to earth, as real and authentic feeling as any live action film. That scene at the end is so beautiful, and having the film named after the connective tissue between the generations, despite not being in much of it, ties it all together even better. It's a wonderful movie. It looks amazing, sounds amazing, and it moves me like few other things have done. I'm not one to bemoan how they don't make them like they used to, because there's still plenty of great stuff coming out nowadays, but there is a personality and grit to the action thrillers of the 70s and 80s which we don't really get anymore that I love. Die Hard is a prime example. It's got an instantly alluring premise lending itself to tons of possibilities, which get utilized to great effect through tight construction, incredibly snappy writing, and wonderful sense of character. The underdog hero, fantastic villain, and everyone else in between offer a variety of dynamics and perspectives which maximize the charm, suspense, and humanity of the proceedings. That last one is what really cements Die Hard as an all-timer. John jumping off the top of Nakatomi Plaza is another sequence that continues to leave me on the edge of my seat despite knowing what happens, largely because McClane is so likable, and you really feel as if you've been to hell and back with him over the course of the movie. As a result, I can't think of another blockbuster which has such a strong feeling of catharsis at the end for both the characters and the viewer. This movie was a big inspiration for a thriller screenplay I wrote, so I think it deserves a spot on this first list for that, as well as just being pretty darn awesome. This probably isn't a favourite for a lot of people, but BlacKkKlansman knocked me for 6 when it first came out. Both times I saw it in the theatre, you could have heard a pin drop during the silence at the end. It kickstarted an interest in race-related stories as well as Spike Lee's vibrant filmography. The style here is pretty understated for him, but it really fits the material because through the chilled pace and the characters being defined by their personalities and natural back and forth, it feels like a film that was actually made in the 70s and not just set there, similar to The Holdovers. The emphasis on the undercover procedural elements really appeals to me, and the juxtapositions between love and hate are so powerfully done. Despite the harrowing nature of much of this, the birth of the nation scene still leaves a pit in my stomach. There is a lot of joy to be found in this film too. That dance scene is euphoric, and the comedy is frequently hilarious, right from that fantastic scene setter with Alec Baldwin.
We had
The Klan describing themselves as the invisible organization despite having a great big ad in the newspaper really tickles me. And having read the book it's based on, there's also a juxtaposition between fantasy and reality. There is a lot about the power of storytelling through film. Ron guarding David Duke was the craziest thing to actually happen. Quite a bit was made up for the film to make it more exciting, dramatic, and in the case of the ending scenes, incredibly satisfying. It feels very intentional that the part of the ending to feature in both the film and the book is the cross-burning. One of Spike Lee's best double dolly shots transitions us into the full reality of the situation and into an incredibly haunting closer. It's more thematically rich than the usual true story retelling, and I think that's what makes it my favorite film based on a true story. Second if we're counting Fargo, teehee. But yeah, what a tour de force. "2019 marked the apex of my dive into film, keeping track of and managing little over 200 first watches. And the two I obsessed over the most were filled with details I loved unpacking and analyzing. First was Punch Drunk Love, the film where I truly began to appreciate how every facet of filmmaking could be used to elevate a simple story into an incredibly unique, creative, and dense character study. But as fun as it is to wonder about the abrupt randomness of the opening car crash and the harmonium's arrival, it being confusing is the point. Barry fixing and finding comfort in the harmonium is symbolic of latching onto purpose in a world we can't fully understand. And even when Barry suppresses his emotions, the confrontational supporting roles, antsy cinematography, and chaotic soundtrack fully embody his anxiety and loneliness. So when the camera work stabilizes, the colors increase, and the music becomes more melodic as he finds control and love in his life, it's equally as riveting on a technical level as it is an emotional one. Something else I haven't spoken much about on my channel is the fact I'm autistic, and the first time I saw this it felt very rewarding to notice a lot of the symptoms in Barry without the movie explicitly diagnosing him. If I wasn't, Paul Thomas Anderson does such a brilliant job immersing you into his headspace I'd connect with him anyway, but resonating with his sensory overload and jittery excitement does add to how special I find this movie and Adam Sandler's performance. It's absurd, melancholic, delirious, beautiful, oddly funny. There's nothing else quite like it. So what about the other film I found most addictive in 2019? Well, given its absence until now, I think it's clear I'm not the biggest fan of horror. I'm more open to it than I used to be, but I rarely seek it out or get excited about new releases, with the exception of Jordan Peele's work. I may not love the genre, but he clearly does, evident by the enthusiasm he's brought to all of his films so far, and the imagination with which he explores certain themes I find to be incredibly captivating. And although most rank it at the bottom of his filmography, Us is my personal favourite. The most rewarding thing about rewatching his movies is not catching all the bits of foreshadowing, but rather seeing how certain characters and events look completely different once you know the full context, while the thrill and suspense is maintained. So despite considering all the details like the themes of nature and nurture, or how the opening shot tells the whole story, among many other things, in between my first viewing on the big screen, where the part Red spoke for the first time chilled me to the bone, and getting the Blu-ray, From the immediate unease brought on by the stunning nighttime visuals and the emphasis of the sounds of the boardwalk in the opening, I was left utterly hooked by the story and atmosphere instead. The mix of the satirical subtext of Get Out with the summertime fun and slick craft of Nope, along with the family dynamic which adds a lot to the prevailing threat, works so phenomenally for me. The showdown intercut with the ballet performance might honestly be one of my favourite fight scenes ever. The way it represents Adelaide battling with her past, which toys with her like a memory you want to but can't forget, is so damn cool. If I wasn't convinced this movie was an all-time favourite, that scene and the final needle drop would have surely sealed the deal. It gives me such a high every time, leaving me eager to try and unpack everything it has to offer and to be caught up in its whirlwind of suspense and humor all over again. And to finish this first part, a film that was not only very influential to my own, but also features in it.
Heading towards week 8 with these 3 incredible kids.
I first saw Magnolia at a very impactful time. I had just started to take my filmmaking thoughts seriously, and thus had it on my mind a lot when making Play for Views, particularly editing the opening montage and deciding what and when served as a segue into a different person. It was also at the height of lockdown, where it unintentionally captured certain feelings from that time very powerfully. Despite following multiple characters and storylines, the film is crafted as if it's only one. The free-flowing camera and amazing score build a unified momentum between the stories, so when they all hit the emotional peaks at the same time, the pull it has from scene to scene is incredible. Every performance is gripping. I understand why Tom Cruise was singled out at the Oscars, but this film is a prime example as to why the Best Casting Award is long overdue. There's no weak link here, and the way these characters' lives eventually intertwine in such unconventional ways is thrilling and very moving. There are intersections between the stories and some that serve as warning signs for others, but these characters are ultimately linked by being separated. The Wise Up scene sums it up in such a ballsy and beautiful way. Most of these people never meet and probably never will, yet they're all singing the same song. Connected by the human struggle, united by their loneliness. Yeah, that was quite profound viewing during COVID. The use of weather too, seemingly matching the emotional wavelength of the characters until the craziest thing pulls the rug out from under that notion and reveals it as merely coincidence. It serves the same purpose as the opening of Punch Drunk Love. You can read into it for sure, but the point is it shows these people are not fully in control of the world, and it's what they do with that realization that really matters. Seeing these broken people begin to strive for a better tomorrow with what they can control is an extremely poignant end to this spectacularly bold 3-hour epic that never lets up. And that'll do us for now. Thank you if you made it this far, and I hope you'll join me for part 2 very soon.